Hi everyone, welcome to episode 47. Today I'm with a special guest, author and my pastor, Mr. Dale Beaver. I'm thankful to get to listen to him every Sunday morning and have him on the podcast. We were actually originally supposed to record this before Easter, but schedule got in the way. But that's okay because we're supposed to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus year-round and not just on holiday.
Sure.
So the first thing I ask every guest is, what is your testimony?
I was raised in a Christian home, and kind of fitting with the theme of our podcast today, we were in a crisis situation in our family. My dad's best friend had died. So while I'd heard the gospel a lot from my mom and dad, and also from my grandfather, who's a pastor, it was the death of my dad's best friend. I'd never experienced death, and just everything that I heard about Jesus and his resurrection, and how death really doesn't have the final answer on our lives, but life does. That really connected me to the gospel in a very experiential way. I would say it was an existential crisis, and that forced me to come to terms with the truth of the gospel when I was about 9 years old. And so I made a decision to really not just believe everything that my grandfather had told me, but to truly take God at His word in that, and to trust Jesus for not just my salvation, but also what that meant in terms of living forever, and that death would not have the final answer on my life. So not only did I believe that Christ died for me in terms of forgiveness of my sins, but just the future and the hope to live with, starting from that really crisis moment in our lives.
It's wonderful that you experienced that at 9. Obviously not the troubles, but that the troubles turned into your testimony.
Absolutely.
And you were 9 years old. Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so getting into the episode, why is Easter celebrated?
Easter celebrated, we even worship on, you talked about resurrection is something we celebrate all the time. And really, a lot of people may not think about it, but in the Jewish calendar, and according to the Jewish faith, which Christianity, our roots are there, Saturday was the Sabbath. And the reason we worship on Sunday is because that was the day after the Sabbath, and Christ would have risen from the dead. So Sunday really is that resurrection day that we celebrate each week. So Easter is that one time of the year. You'd have to go back and search, do some historical searches, particularly in the area of Emperor Constantine, when he kind of was the Roman emperor that kind of made the world Christian. It was the official religion of the Roman Empire at the time, which is kind of interesting because it was under the Roman Empire that Christ was crucified to begin with. But Easter, coming out of Constantine's rule, you had that observance, and I think some pagan aspects of it gets mishmashed in with the authentic reasons behind Easter, and we've kind of got to pull the threads between all of that. But it will, to answer your question, Easter is observed basically based on church calendar that came, historically back during the reign of Constantine, as I understand it. And you can probably find more takes on that. Some of them I think are a bit overblown, and kind of reinterpretations on ancient kind of things. It's sometimes it's sometimes difficult to differentiate between the pagan understanding of Easter and the true Christian authentic celebration of the resurrection day.
That's cool. I didn't know that context, actually. But that leads us into our next question. How do you differentiate commercial Easter with religious Easter?
Well, you think about it, and I don't really think in and of themselves chocolate and candy, those are good things. and bunnies are too, right? Bunnies are too. But I do think, again, because of what the enemy wants to do, the resurrection of Christ, Madison, is the pivotal cosmic significance. I mean, that is the most unique event in human history, and that's the one thing Christians can point to, obviously, is, okay, the Son of God not only dying for the sins of man, but being raised on the third day, and the significance of that, in that He not just overcame the curse of sin, which was death, but that He appeared, and it was well attested to. People lived and died based on their testimony and seeing the risen Christ. The Apostle Paul, who writes the majority of our New Testament, had had an encounter with the resurrected Christ. So I mean, so much of our obviously the faith and how we grow in our lives is based on the testimony of those that saw the risen Christ, and the hope we have that one day we'll see him too. And as he is. So all that to say is, the pivotal universal significance of that, which is so unique and so important to our faith. You think about it, the enemy wants to leverage the commercialization and all that. The enemy wants to leverage that, obviously, to be a distraction. So, in a capitalistic society, which I'm thankful we live in a democracy and all that kind of great things, and when we live, I mean, it could be a lot worse. Obviously, yes. Obviously, because of that, the people who sell candies and cards and all that kind of thing, they can leverage the religious aspect of that, but they can also leverage the celebration, which is uniquely Christian, to those who aren't Christian, by making it about other things. Right, yeah. So it's just important that we keep in mind that while in and of itself there isn't anything essentially wrong with all that fun stuff we do around Easter, it can certainly be a distraction. And our enemy, the adversary to the gospel, we call him the devil. I mean, Satan, the adversary, definitely wants. They would rather our attention be on the commercialization side of it, as it would be the true reason behind the celebration of Easter.
I think that's a good point. It's definitely a distraction, which I think a lot of things in this world and generation are. So it's important not to idolize the candy and the chocolates and the bunnies, like you said. So what is the true importance of Jesus rising from the grave? Oh,
that's one of the best questions anybody could ask. And I think, just for your listeners, this podcast, I think it's a great, young people like yourself, and I'm old now. Young people like yourself, that I think you're constantly looking for ways to what's a good way for me to talk about my faith with somebody else, and to be able to address the significance of the resurrection. That ultimately, everything we believe about Jesus, sure, he was a good man. We could say he was a prophet. I mean, a lot of people will give him those kind of philosophical titles and things, and he had some wonderful examples in his life that we could say. But you know what? What makes him unique is that we believe he was the God-man who put on flesh and went to the cross and died for us. And the reality of what he accomplished on the cross is again linked, intimately linked to the resurrection. The work of Christ on the cross, obviously, is different from what was accomplished in the resurrection. The resurrection validated, or it proved, right, that the work that Christ did on the cross was satisfactory to God. That as much as I might love my son and my sons and my wife, and I would die for them, my death can't atone for their sins. And as much as your granddad loves you, and probably all his grandkids, he couldn't take your place before, in a right standing before God. Only Christ can do that. So because Jesus was sinless in his work on the cross, his death on the cross enables that right relationship with God to be restored that was broken by sin. And the beautiful thing about the resurrection is the reason we celebrate every Sunday is because we are celebrating the reality of the authentication, the validation that everything Jesus said he would do on the cross was accomplished. And the resurrection proves that. If we don't have the resurrection, then there's no assurance, there's no hope, right? So even though they're distinct in their event, and they're intimately linked together. So that's why it's so very important.
That's what I was going to say, that the penalty of sin is death, and Jesus took that upon himself. But it's the fact that he did die and rise that makes Jesus trustworthy and a promise keeper, and that's how we know that his word is true and we can believe it.
Yeah. The thing about the reality that the wages of sin is death, Paul says in Romans, which is great. We earned that because of sin. I'm a sinner in need of a Savior. That Jesus, because he was sinless, didn't have to die. Right? So for him to die, for him to submit himself to death, means that only he could do that in a substitutionary way. He could take my place. He could take your place. And again, just to have the resurrection as that celebration moment to where we get to see the reverse of the curse and everything that has gone as a result of sin is just, I mean, it's the reason behind why we worship, at the core of it, and who we worship. And that's delightful.
That was beautifully said. Can you explain Holy Week, Good Friday, Resurrection Sunday?
Yeah. There's a little bit of debate on the way the Gospels lay this out. Was it a literal 7-day week, or did these events kind of happen over the course of a short amount of time leading up to Jerusalem? Okay. Normally we accept it as a week. We kind of pull it together. The way the Gospels kind of present it there in that way that the chronology may be hard to figure out exactly what's going on in some ways, but we tend to, that last trip to Jerusalem where Jesus goes up, and we have Palm Sunday where he enters Jerusalem riding on a colt, a donkey's colt, a foal of a donkey, and so you get that image of kings as they would ride into town during peacetime. They would not ride on a battle horse or a war horse. They would ride in on a donkey, which was a beast of burden, a symbol of I'm not coming here, to conquer and overthrow. I'm coming in peace. I'm coming to bring peace. Yeah. So he comes in, and obviously he's rejected by those that were in power over him in authority. But during that week, we see some real interesting things. He goes into the temple, and he runs out those that are making a mockery of it by cheating people in the sacrificial system, and you get that. You get obviously leading up to the last Passover. Jesus celebrates his last Passover meal. Think about it. He'd gone up to Jerusalem. Jesus would have gone up to Jerusalem if he lived. We think he 33 years old. So we historically say that. So for 33 years, Jesus had made the trip to Jerusalem since he was a boy. And this was the last time he went there for Passover. And he chooses as a last meal the Passover meal with his disciples. And so what we embrace as the backdrop for how we celebrate the Lord's Supper, communion, comes out of that. What Jesus signified there, that this meal points to something very ancient in the exodus of our people from Egypt. But what that exodus from Egypt pointed to was me. So as as the Jews that celebrate this for centuries now, Jesus says, I am the true fulfillment of everything this points to. Yeah. So we get a real defining moment during Holy Week of his purpose for coming for us. And then again, you of course you get the betrayal of Jesus from Judas. You get the denial by Peter, the appearance before Pilate. All of that happened within the last moments, if you will, of Holy Week. And then, of course, we celebrate Good Friday. It's good because Christ was crucified for us. He accomplished a good work as a good man, and only as the only good man for us. And so, what transpired there was for our benefit. And then, of course, you get the bewilderment of the disciples. You can imagine while he's in the tomb, the disillusionment, perhaps, and what did really this accomplish, and has this accomplished anything, and what have we missed? And at the same time, they're mourning the loss of their rabbi, our Messiah. So anyway, you get to you can put yourself kind of in their emotional categories as they are rising and falling throughout this whole week. Their hopes are up and they're in despair.
Emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, the emotional roller coaster. Great way to put that. It's an emotional roller coaster, and then you can imagine, of course, what the tomb's empty.
Yeah.
The tomb is empty. That was probably the wildest roller coaster ride of emotion that you could probably go on. Yeah, absolutely.
I think what you said about the Passover also goes back to what you said about the choice, because it was ultimately his choice to be crucified and to choose to save us, and it all stems through his love for us. What are your favorite pieces of scripture to reflect on during the Easter season?
I kept this. When I saw the question that you'd written, this is the one I really want to think about most, because this is a big deal to me. I mean, I encourage your listeners, not just to, particularly obviously as you're leading up to Easter, but anytime, do a study on the last words of Jesus. Jesus says 7 sayings from the cross. There are 7 unique statements that Jesus says on the cross after he's crucified, and you can find those in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Not all of you have to kind of do the trail because all those 7 words aren't they're piecemeal through there, but that's really, really good. Matthew 26 and 27, that gives you those final moments. You've got the last Passover there. You've got in Matthew 26 and 27, you got Peter will deny Jesus. Judas will deny Jesus. The Garden of Gethsemane, Madison, to me, that is one of the most pivotal events we have in Scripture leading up to the crucifixion, because I believe the victory over Satan was really accomplished in the garden. We think about it being on the cross, but for Christ, that final battle before actually being nailed to the cross happens in Gethsemane. Adam and Eve fell in a garden. Jesus, as the victorious Adam, succeeds in the garden. You've got this antithesis kind of juxtaposition going on there that's wonderful. When Jesus asked the Father for another way, and you see that it's not because he's afraid to go to the cross. It's just that he can't. There's no way he can fathom really the separation that's going to come when the sin of the world is placed on him on the cross.
Wow. So
he asked the Father for another way, and just that whole aspect of if there's another way, I don't have to drink the cup of your wrath that will separate us, and then for the Father to say, no, Son, there is no other way. I mean, that you don't hear God say that to him, but obviously that's the implication. And then you begin to think about that and how we tend to want to find our own way to God, and we think that when we stand before God, we'll have our own way of getting to God. And then we pull back away from the Garden of Gethsemane and go, wait a minute. If God didn't give his Son another way, he's not going to give me another way.
That's good.
So that meditation in the Garden of Gethsemane I encourage your listeners to really wring that out as much as they can. That is really deep there. I love the short, abrupt ending after the resurrection, Mark 16. I love Mark 16. Mark just kind of like, she was scared. Okay, she walked away and she was terrified. Okay, and that's kind of the ending of Mark. It's like, okay, wait a minute. What are you thinking about that? Why does Mark do that? Luke 24. You get the unique. Only does Luke give us that encounter